There are three questions that I get asked all the time, and those are: how do you create magic, how do you create routines, and how do you start making money with magic? Without a doubt, I get asked those all the time, more than any other question. I can't give all the advice that I want to in an email or an Instagram message or briefly talk about it for 1 minute in a video. There's just so much to talk about. I could honestly talk for hours about each of those subjects. So I've made myself a promise. I'm going to make 3 video projects, and this is one of them. And in each video project, I'm going to talk about one of those questions. And today we are tackling how to create magic. It's a big topic, there's a lot to talk about, so without further ado, without me babbling on any longer, let's dive headfirst into this and talk about my creative process when I create magic, how to even start beginning to think of effects, and what to do once you've come up with an idea, how to then develop that into something that you'd be happy practicing, performing, even teaching to people in whatever format you want. How to take an idea from the starting block right to the finish line until you are fully happy with it. It's a big process, there's a lot to talk about, so we're just going to go through it in chronological order. And to do this also, I'm going to use some examples of tricks that I've created. So I'm going to be talking about the signature duplication effect, I'm going to be talking about the deck switch that I've taught on YouTube, and something else that I've not taught on YouTube just yet. These tricks are just going to be examples of how to create magic, and hopefully by the end of this, you will want to create something and you might even have an idea during this. It's like a brainstorming session, and hopefully together, including myself, we will come up with something productive, and maybe during this I will come up with a new idea. Ideas come from all sorts of places, and so I'm not expecting this video to be the only place that you take ideas from. That's ridiculous. Ideas come from everywhere, they come from all walks of life. And so this is just my way of doing it. So it's not a tutorial in the sense of, yes, I will be giving advice, I will be, telling you what's worked for me, but it's just what's worked for me, and things work differently for other people, for other magicians. So there will be other magicians who give advice that's completely opposite to this, and that's okay. I'm not saying my advice is any more valuable than theirs. Everyone has a different experience when it comes to creating anything. And that is completely alright. It's totally 100% brilliant, I think, that people can have different perspectives on how to make something. And so this is just my perspective. This is just how I make something. And hopefully you can take something away from this. So let's dive right in with the beginning of the creative process, how to actually come up with an idea. First thing very quickly that you need to think about when you're creating a magic trick is your audience. Who are you creating this trick for? It might sound a bit obvious, but it really does affect the trick, because each of the ways that you can perform magic has restrictions and advantages. This is magic that is just for the camera, and the restrictions obviously with this, and I've spoken about this in other videos, is the lack of misdirection. In the 4 sides of the frame of the video, it's almost impossible to be able to misdirect people in the same way that you can the human eye when you're in person and having that human interaction that close-up magic has. You can't really misdirect people on camera, so you need to take that into consideration with the magic. However, one massive advantage is the angle of the trick, because you can perform tricks that are really angle sensitive on camera and get away with it, because your audience are all in one exact place, and you get to choose that. And the final big advantage of doing magic on camera is being able to use an entirely different set of methods, and that is camera magic, editing, and video, tinkering around with the video to make the trick work. That is a big advantage of doing magic on camera. You have that ability, and you don't have that with anything else. Whenever I create an idea to do with magic, I imagine myself performing it in close-up, because that's where I find myself most comfortable performing. I don't think close-up magic has a lot of restrictions, actually. I can't really think of many things that are restrictive about close-up magic. I guess the only thing really I can think about is the audience. The audience have free will to move around wherever they want. And so when you create a trick, you need to think about, well, what if the audience do this? What if they do that? What if they try and mess up the trick? You need to, I know it sounds a bit pessimistic, but you do need to think about what if the audience does certain things to try and mess you up. And so your ideas need to be really, really strong in that way. I've spoken about this before, but every trick you perform should have a backup, just in case. Even if you think it can't go wrong, just in case it does. it needs to have a fallback option, something that you can just go into straight away as soon as it goes wrong. And so when you come up with an idea, maybe you don't think about the backup straight away, but it would be interesting to start to think of ways that you can get out of this if this does go wrong. Are there other alternatives? And maybe in thinking about that, that's actually the idea that you land on, and the original idea becomes the backup. However, close-up magic has so many advantages, I can't even get into them. You can have misdirection, you can have human interaction, you can have all those brilliant things that we know and love about close-up magic. And finally, stage magic. I'm not really going to be talking too much about stage magic, but again, you need to think about angles, you need to think about how far your audience is away, what plays big on stage, what plays small, and if it's really, really small, is it a close-up thing rather than a stage thing? All of that to consider. So now we've spoken a little bit about audience, it's time to zoom in a little bit on close-up magic and pick an idea, pick an example that I've come up with in the past and dissect it. How did I come up with this? But also, I'm going to take you through my basic rules for creating tricks. So you've got yourself a blank page. There you are, staring at a blank page, and you want to come up with an idea. It's tough. I'm sure there's a name for it. Staring at a blank page, waiting for an idea to come. And the blankness is burning into your retinas and frying your mind and frazzling you until your brain starts pouring out of your... It's almost impossible. You can't really do that. That's not how the human brain works. And so you need to come into an idea session already loaded with something that you want to come up with an idea about. And I find the best way of doing this actually comes from a video that I do really recommend you go and watch, which is by Stephen Bridges. And he talks about his creative process in this video. And he says the best way of coming up with an idea is by having a restriction. Some sort of restriction that cuts down your options into something. And I think in that video he uses the idea of a mug. So what can you do with a mug? And then that is where your ideas come from. So if you want to do a trick with a mug, think about the mug, think about the aspects of a mug. Does something go through it? Do the handles link? Do you break it and repair it or something? Now you can, if you want, come in with an effect already that you want to achieve. So maybe your effect is you want to tear a corner off a playing card and restore it just by throwing the piece at the card. Okay, maybe that's already your idea. Maybe you don't have an idea of how to do that, but maybe that's what you want to do. And so from there, that is a great restriction because you can start to come up with methods for this. So if you're just after a method, then my one piece of advice that I've already spoken about on the channel before actually, in my Every Magician Needs to Hear This video, the 10 things to be a better magician, is allow yourself to think silly. A really, really good mental exercise is to think about silly ideas. Methods that would never work. Things that just are so impractical and impossible and ridiculous. Just methods that you can't possibly do. So for instance, let's come up with a silly method right now. Okay, let's say this plant here. I want to turn it from a brown sort of horrible plant into a luscious green one. That's the effect I want to achieve. I want to sort of make autumn turn into spring. Okay, that's the idea I've just come up with, and literally I'm just thinking on the spot here. So my silly idea, my silly method for this, let's imagine the plant is brown and I want to turn it bright green. Let's imagine I have a spray paint can in one pocket and a big tube going across my arm, down my sleeve and out here, so that I hold the brown plant and just by waving it about, clicking my fingers, doing magical gestures, the paint is spewing onto it. The green paint turns the brown plant green. Let's imagine that's how it ends up green. So there we go. Right there, I came up with a silly idea. But once again, I'm allowing myself to go into areas of my imagination that I didn't allow myself before. This is where I'm going to talk about the signature duplication trick. So I came up with a trick where you are able to duplicate a signature. And when I was coming up with that idea a few years ago, the ideas I came up with before I landed on the actual trick that I perform that's in my repertoire, I came up with a load of daft ideas that wouldn't work. And one of those was with a magnetic pen and a bit of ink that was also magnetic inside the card box. So when someone took the card, signed it on top of the box, the magnetic pen was also drawing on the card inside the box, and it duplicated the signature perfectly. I also came up with a transfer idea where there was a layer of sort of like plastic over it, so that when you wrote on the signature, it signed the card and also a layer of plastic that you could then transfer to the card that you wanted to duplicate. There were a ton of ideas, really, really stupid ideas. Eventually, my daft ideas made me land on an idea that became the actual method, and something that I've used so many times and even taught on YouTube. So if you want to learn this properly, in depth, don't learn it from this video, learn it from the actual tutorial. And essentially, I just thought to myself, well, if I want to duplicate a signature, they're signing their card here. I want them to just sign it out in the open and me be able to get hold of a duplicate. And I just thought to myself, what if I just copy them? Why not just go for something really, really simple? And so often that is some mistakes that we make, that I make. I make them all the time. We think too complicated, we think like magicians. When you're coming up with methods, obviously, sometimes it's good to think like a magician, but sometimes we get ourselves so buried in the complicated methods that we forget that actually sometimes the most deceptive thing is the most simple thing. And the same thing with the deck switch. So I'll talk a little bit about the deck switch. Vital deck switch. I've seen a load of people using it, by the way. That's great, thank you so much. Anyone that uses any of my tricks, it's just incredible to see. When I came up with Vital deck switch, and again, I'm not being big-headed here because I don't know if I'm a creative magician or not. It's not up for me to say. But when I came up with Vital deck switch, I looked at some of the other deck switches like Fracture, Cold Case, the Cooler, all of which use the idea, the pretense of a card box, which is perfect, and I already knew that I wanted to go along those lines because a card box is the perfect innocent vessel for carrying a deck that you want to switch in or out. It's just perfect. It's sitting there in plain sight. Everyone just assumes it's empty. As soon as you display a deck of cards and an empty card box lying on the table, no one even pays attention to this. They just assume that it's empty. And in having that assumption, in the audience having that assumption, you are able to use that by having a deck in here and a way of switching it out. One thing I didn't want to do is have a deck in play and bring a box to it. Too many deck switches do that. I didn't want to bring the box to the deck and then put it away. Why would you do that? To me, that just seems so illogical, having to bring the box up and then to the pocket and obviously switching the deck in that action. Instead, if we really wanted to put the box away, we'd just pick it up and we'd put it away. That's all we'd do, we'd just pick it up and put it away. So how about we do that with a deck in our hand? We just pick it up and we put it away. And in doing that, we've switched the deck, because now we have a deck sat on the table, ready to be put into action, and it's all perfectly done for us. Another bit of advice I would give is just allow yourself to make mistakes. Allow yourself to be wrong occasionally. You know, you can see already from the ideas I've spoken about with the signature duplication. You know, I came up with a couple of daft ideas. Same with this. I came up with, you know, moving parts, you know, magnets and all that sort of stuff. And that was wrong. That was wrong. And I knew, sort of half knew, when I came up with it, it is wrong, but I need to try anyway. And I think allowing yourself to be wrong occasionally is alright. You don't need to come in with the idea that the first thing you come up with is going to be it, and if you don't, that's it, that's wrong, you know. That's completely ridiculous. You're allowed to be wrong. You can be wrong 100 times, and maybe the 101st idea is the one that becomes the method, and that's okay. Along with that comes a certain level of determination as well. If you have an idea, to continue at it, to keep going at it, and just think of different ways of doing it. And if you've run out of, you know, ways to do it, let's say you want to create a new deck switch, or let's say you're, you know, doing this idea of throwing a corner and having it restore in that moment. Let's say you've run out of ideas, you've thought of absolutely everything, you're just completely lost. How do I do this effect? You've no idea. Move on to something else. Genuinely, move on to something else and think of other ideas, because you can get so bogged down in one concept that you can't see it anymore. You just can't see anything else other than this idea, and you just lose yourself. You lose everything. Just bring yourself away from it. Have a cup of tea. I'm British, what can I say? That's the solution to everything. Maybe even bringing yourself away from one idea and onto another idea is alright, but I think what I would suggest actually is just take 5 minutes, take an hour, take a day, take as long as you need to just do something else. Maybe you're just gonna build some Lego, or maybe you're gonna build a card tower, or whatever it is that just chills you out. Have a game of online chess, or poker, or solitaire or something. Do something other than this idea, and when you come back to it, maybe you have a fresh perspective on it. maybe because you've been building this Lego set, you've seen a really interesting technique that's used in Lego, and you go, well, hold on a second, that's really cool because I can apply it to this idea. So sometimes the ideas come from surprising places, which leads me on to my next point. My next point is called Ideas in Surprising Places. It's an apt name, I think you'll agree. So sometimes ideas just come from the weirdest random places, in the world. And when I interviewed Lloyd Barnes about this, if you've not seen that video by the way, I think if you're interested in this topic, that interview in particular will be really interesting because he's a very creative magician. He's come up with a lot of ideas. When I interviewed him, it was almost like I was trying to squeeze advice out of him for coming up with creative ideas. The ideas that Lloyd has come up with often don't come directly from magic. A lot of the time they come from other things. He sees something that's really interesting and he goes, I can use that in a different way and I can apply it to magic. And if you've not seen Lloyd's work, just take a look at his Instagram account. It's really, really worth it. There's a lot of great ideas on there and inspiration. Not necessarily to copy that and perform those tricks, but just inspiration of using methods in ways that you wouldn't even think of. Why didn't I think of that moments? I love those moments. Occasionally what I like to do is just explore the internet for a bit. Maybe I go on Twitter or Reddit or something like that and look at interesting scientific things or optical illusions and see how I can apply that to magic. One person who's doing that at the moment, which is really, really cool, is Cavan Morelli. He's got an Instagram account called The Nothing Experiment, I think. It'll be linked on screen. And on that account, he's doing interesting things with optical illusions, scientific principles, things like that, and using them in magic in ways that I've not seen anyone do before, which is really, really cool to see. Inspiration can be found from all sorts of places, and often it's just about thinking a little bit outside the box. And by the box, I often mean magic. Just think a little bit outside of magic, and you end up coming across things that are so cool. So for instance, the other day I was looking at what are they called? Like autonomer, things that move on their own through mechanics. And I was just thinking, how can that be used in a magic effect? And quite honestly, there are so many ideas. A really simple example of using scientific principles in a method is my work on mirrors and shiners and things like that. A way of seeing around corners with a mirror. That idea initially came from a periscope that I had that was like a kid's toy, really. I mean, that was literally what it was. Ideas that I come up with often aren't complicated. They're often really basic, when you sort of strip it down to essentially what it is. They're quite basic things. Now, I've spoken about taking yourself away from an idea and coming back to it, with fresh eyes. I've spoken about looking outside of magic at other ideas, that aren't to do with magic at all, like science and mechanics and technology and other principles, completely unrelated, and then applying those to magic. And I think that can be really helpful. However, sometimes looking inward is okay too. So I came up with a trick called Camberwell, which is a way of tearing, this is why I've got this, tearing a corner off a card, having it disappear and reappear somewhere else. And that might sound familiar, because it is familiar. It is based off the effect of Daniel Madison's Angle Zero, or Jay Sankey's, I'm not really sure what he calls it. What does he call it? Like candy bar something, or let's just say PTP, okay? Jay Sankey's PTP, or Daniel Madison's Angle Zero. It's the same effect, okay? No doubt it is the same effect. Tearing a corner right off a card, having it disappear and reappear in an impossible location. This is absolutely nothing against Daniel Madison or Jay Sankey. Both are incredible magicians, obviously. But one of the restrictions of that trick is you aren't able to do this. You aren't able to have the card examined. You certainly aren't able to have the card signed across the whole face and have that signature match up. So that, again, was another restriction, and I was really setting myself quite a challenge here. I don't know when I came up with this, but it was a long time ago. How do you start coming up with ideas for this? And what assumptions does your audience have that you can defy? So what do they think is happening? When you show a card like this, what are they assuming about this card? When they have a signed card, when they examine it, what are they not looking out for? In offbeat moments, in misdirection, in the moments they're not paying attention, what can be done that allows you to then have effects like this? And hopefully I'm not giving too much away here from my own effect, But those were the ideas I was coming up with. And your audience's assumptions, again, is so important, like how we were talking about with the deck switch. They see a box on a table, they see you holding cards, and they just assume, not even consciously, just unconsciously, they just assume this is an empty, innocent box. Because what else could it be in their minds for their assumption? Their assumption, however, is wrong, and you constantly need to be playing with that as a magician. That's your job, to play with the assumptions of your audience. So, quick note about time restrictions. Sometimes when I create things, I like to put a time restriction on whatever it is, and I think this can be helpful, can be a little bit helpful. Sometimes it can be harmful though. I did a video a while ago which people seem to enjoy, which is creating a trick in an hour. An hour to create a method and an effect based on a random word that was given to me. And that was fun, don't get me wrong, that was really, really fun. I think sometimes putting yourself in a time restriction does mean that your brain is forced to be jogged into coming up with something. I think sometimes that's a great thing. However, I wouldn't take, let's say you set yourself the same challenge of, coming up with a trick in an hour. Don't take what you come up with in that hour as the final product, like I did in that video. I was doing that for the video. I would never, settle on something that I came up with in an hour. Does skill level matter when you're creating magic? Big question. Does skill level matter? I think sometimes, no. I actually am a sort of believer in beginner's luck, and don't worry, this will all come full circle, I'm not just going on a random tangent. If you're playing a card game that you've never played before, there will sort of be an element of what people might call beginner's luck, because you've not played this game before. So you don't have that sort of structure in your head, what's the word? I guess the word is sort of assumptions. Again, you don't have assumptions about this game because you've never played it before. So you come in with a fresh mind, and you might try things that a more experienced player just simply wouldn't try. And those things might pay off because you're playing the field more risky. You're doing things that an experienced player would go, oh, there's no chance that I'm doing that. Like if you first play Monopoly and you're spending all your money, going around the board for the first time. It's madness. You wouldn't do that. You've got to keep some money, for the rest of the game. But if you've never played the game before, you might not understand that. And so you go doing that, and it might pay off. And so you might have that bit of beginner's luck because you don't have those, that back catalogue of mistakes or errors. So if you are a new magician then, linking it back to magic, if you are a new magician, you're new to the game, and so you think of things that people that are really buried into magic wouldn't think of, because they've been doing it so much and they know about the conventions of magic, they know what's right and what's wrong. My number one tip about creativity, about creating magic, is that there is no right or wrong. A lot of the methods I come up with are unconventional. I think now, obviously, I don't know if I'm a creative magician. I've said this before. I don't know if I'm a creative magician. It's not up to me to decide, but I know that the things I have created are quite unconventional. The methods are unusual, and they don't always work for some people. Some people hate them, and that's fine. For me, the only thing that matters is what the audience sees. It doesn't matter what the method is. You can use anything in your arsenal of tools and weapons in magic. You can use whatever you want. I think it's something that other magicians have talked about. Any way of doing a trick is okay, so long as the effect is as good as it can be. The method can be anything. So maybe you already have an idea and you think, I'm not going to pursue that because it's not like other methods. It's just not magical enough. It doesn't involve the beautiful sleights that you see in books. It doesn't involve the gimmicks that we're used to. That might mean you've come up with something really, really good. If your method is unlike anything that you've seen before in magic, or you're using a principle, again, from somewhere outside the box, and applying it to a trick, that might mean that it's the next best trick. Okay, idea production. How do you take the idea that you've come up with and turn it into a real thing that you can practice and perform? In terms of difficulty, probably coming up with an idea is the hardest bit, but in terms of time, it's going to take a lot longer
to turn the idea into something real, into something actually tangible. In order to start practicing something that you've come up with, you need to know about the thing, you need to know it inside out. So try and think, this is a bit of a weird analogy, but try and think of the idea as a piece of elastic. You want to test the limitations of it. You want to stretch it to its limit until it breaks, really. So going back to what we were talking about before with the audience, you need to know in what circumstances this works best in. And so you need to test that. You need to perform it to camera and try out different styles of performing it. And yes, perform it to camera. Now I know that it won't always work best on camera, maybe if it's an idea that uses misdirection, but I still would recommend filming it, because filming it allows you to watch it back as the audience. I've spoken about this in my practicing video, the little practicing tips I gave a while ago. Filming your magic gives you a really good perspective on it, so no matter what it is, I would recommend just watching it back on camera, seeing how it works. To really understand the idea inside out, you need to know all about it, so you need to try it in different ways, different handlings, different techniques or methods of doing the same thing, and just absolutely push it to its limits. So that once you know it inside out, and once you've done all of that, you can then know what to practice. But if you just dive in straight away, from having the idea to practicing it, you won't really know what you're practicing or in what way you should be doing this. However, my number one piece of advice when it comes to practicing something that you've created is to treat it like someone else's trick. Treat it like it's not yours, because when it's yours, there is the risk of being a bit lazy, and I think I've been guilty of this in the past as well, looking back at some older creations. Being lazy because it's your idea. Because it's yours, you think, well, I've come up with this, so surely I know it, surely I know how to do this. And that means that you don't practice it as much. But when you treat it like someone else's trick, you're giving it the respect it deserves as a method, as something that needs practicing. Because when you practice other people's effects, you go from knowing nothing about it to going through that whole practice process and being able to perform it. And in a way, even though you've come up with the idea, you still know nothing about this, because you've not practiced it. Oh, hello. Hello. Have you come to learn about magic? I've never been interrupted by a dog before. That was that was rather unexpected. Another really important tip is that just because it's yours doesn't mean that you shouldn't get help on it. So when you're practicing, when you're developing it, ask other magicians, ask other people that know about it. The creative process shouldn't always be a process of isolation and just having it as a solo mission. I think quite often it's really helpful to ask other magicians about their opinion on the thing that you've made, and often they will see things that you just couldn't see because it's your idea, you're so in the middle of it, you can't always see what it looks like. So yeah, filming it and watching it back is good, you get another point of view of the trick, but you don't get another opinion of the trick. So asking other magicians just fills that in, and it's really helpful. The countless number of times that I've asked other magicians about just specific tiny little things to do with a trick, and it's just opened up that little thing, that little push that I needed to fix a problem. And often, without their help, it wouldn't ever have got to the stage of, being good enough to perform. So that is really important. Ask other magicians and see what they think.
We were talking before about what your audience assumes about a trick, and I think audiences are getting a little bit more intelligent. They're getting a little bit more wise to what magicians can do. A lot of laymen know about the double lift because it's overused. Some laymen even know about the pass because it's been used so much. I've done a double lift at a gig, and people have said, is that really 2 cards then? You've caught me out there. Not because I've done the double lift wrong, just because they know about it. Because we're carrying around in our pockets things that know the answer to anything straight away. These phones, these supercomputers that we have in our pockets. Knowledge is everywhere, and people can find out whatever they want straight away. The world is a very different place to the world that a lot of magicians and a lot of people were growing up in back in the day. In Victorian times when they were creating tricks, they weren't so worried about people knowing how it was done because the audience didn't have access to a lot of that information. For instance, Tesla. And when I say Tesla, I'm not talking about the car company that Elon Musk is to do with. I'm talking about the person that Tesla, the car company, is named after. Nikola Tesla was the pioneer of electricity. He was such an important scientist in history because of his work on electricity. And you will have heard his name because it's everywhere. However, you might not have known that Tesla was also a magician, and his magic shows were actually using electricity as the trick. Not as the method, as the trick. He would show lights and sparks that nowadays we would just instantly see and go, oh right, well that's electricity. Back in the day, that was like he was summoning the dead, that he was playing with the spirit world, and they were going, what? That's crazy! What are these weird lights? Where are they coming from? How is he making them? Because they didn't know about electricity. So in that sense, he was really, really clever because he was using things outside of magic and using them as magic tricks, as entertainment that people were really impressed by. And nowadays, of course, people would just sort of laugh at that because it's just electricity. We've all seen it. There's a light behind me, there's a camera in front of me, I've got my phone here. We are surrounded by things that would have been considered magic years ago. And maybe that is the reason we need magic now more than ever. So thanks for watching. This has been my advice on creativity, and I really hope you took something away from this. It's a bit different to what I normally do, but I just thought I'd talk about magic, talk about tricks, and hopefully give you some advice on how to create magic and where these ideas should come from, and to not be scared of certain methods, you know, to not be scared of taking risks and coming up with something unusual. Because that is really what magic is all about. That's where magic came from. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to click the thumbs up button down below. It's just tapping a button and it helps the channel out a lot. And if you're new and you've never seen a video from me before, then you can subscribe down below and join me on my video making journey throughout this year, throughout 2020. I'm going to be making a lot more content and a lot more different content as well. We've got the 2 other video projects to come, how to build routines and how to make money with magic, how to actually start a career in magic, which I am looking forward to making just as much as I have made this one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
I think you're gonna have to be gentle. We're gonna have to go very